Hello, everyone. A few small announcements before we begin. First off, as always, please put your cell phones on silent, not to disturb everyone else. I also have a few events coming up I want to tell you about. We have National Canadian Film Day, Without Precedent, The Supreme Life of Rosalie Obeya on April 16th at 2 o'clock. And the director and the producer will be here. Mr. Mark Selby and Mr. Barry Average will be here answering questions about the film after the screening. I also want to let you know that our big annual used book sale is going to be April 26th and 27th from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. Bring your money, it's cash only. I also have Logis Action coming up April 23rd. It will be about lease transfers and rental increases for anyone having questions or issues with their landlords, or people who are landlords themselves and have some questions as well. And I also have a concert to tell you about. May 7th, Corps d'Âme presents Fabula. It will be here at 6:30 p.m. Wednesday, May 7th. That's all of my announcements for today. And here is Dr. Joe Schwarcz with Science Demystified.
Thank you. You forgot one. There was some confusion about the next date, the May date, because it was originally the first Monday, but we had to change it. So the next time we meet is not the first Monday, but the second Monday of May. Okay. All right, Passover just around the corner. So of course we will see the Ten Commandments come up again on TV and the streaming services, etc. A great movie. It was the first movie I ever saw in Canada. I remember this very well. It was in the Rialto Theater. That would have been 1957, and there was an intermission. Because it's a very long movie, right? But it was a very good movie. And of course, we saw Moses lead his people out of Egypt. And therein lies the story of Passover, which starts with basically the myth that the Israelites were imprisoned in Egypt. This never happened. There is absolutely no historical evidence for that. It is a story that was concocted, but for a good reason. The reason is that it celebrates Passover. It keeps the Jews together, doing the same kind of things all over the world. But if there had been any slavery in Egypt or any wandering in the desert for 40 years, there would have been some historical artifacts. The Egyptians were meticulous about history. They have records of absolutely everything. And certainly you cannot wander around the Sinai desert for 40 years without leaving some artifacts. But anyway, it really doesn't matter if the story is true or not, because it did serve the purpose. Anyway, in the story, of course, as you know, the 10 plagues are unleashed upon the Egyptians. And of course, the intent is to let the slaves go. And the final plague, the one that really did it, was the death of the firstborn. And this is where the word Passover comes into play, because the angel of death passed over the houses that had been painted with blood, indicating that they were Jews. So that's where the Passover comes from. And the Pharaoh's heart was hardened, as you know, until that last plague, but then he gave in and he told them, go. And go they did and wandered through the desert. But as we all know, according to the story, they had to leave so quickly that there was not time to allow the bread to rise. So they had to quickly bake whatever was there and take it with them. And of course, when bread doesn't rise, that's when we have matzah, which is really the central piece of any Passover celebration. Now, at that time, bread making, of course, was already well known. I mean, the Egyptians were certainly very knowledgeable about yeast and what it could do. Now, this was, of course, an accidental finding that goes back millennia, when people noticed that if you have grain, especially ground up grain like flour, and you moisten it, then you start to see bubbles coming up. I mean, of course, they didn't know that that was carbon dioxide. They didn't know anything about the science here. But they knew that if they just left dough out, it would rise by itself. Well, that, of course, is because yeast is a microorganism that's everywhere. There's yeast in the air, there's yeast in the water, there's yeast in the soil. So yeast will always settle in dough. You will always have some. And the chemical reaction that occurs is a very simple one. Sugar, and it doesn't matter where the sugar comes from, whether it comes from grapes or apples or starch, whatever. But as soon as you mix it with water, the microbes, the yeasts, will start to multiply. And when they multiply, what they do is they produce carbon dioxide and alcohol. That's the product of fermentation. So of course, when we're talking about bread rising, what you are interested in is the carbon dioxide, because as the carbon dioxide, which is a gas, tries to escape from the dough, it causes the dough to rise. That's the action of yeast. But alcohol is also produced. So how come you don't get drunk when you eat bread? How come? Where does the dough go before it becomes bread? In the oven. What's the boiling point of alcohol? 79 degrees. So all the alcohol, of course, will evaporate out of the bread, so you don't get drunk because of the bread. But of course, you can also use yeast and keep the alcohol, right? I mean, that's the whole idea behind alcoholic beverages. And the ancient Sumerians, 4,000 BCE, were already brewing beer, because they had noticed that if you take barley and you just let it sit, it will start to ferment, it will start to change into alcohol. So yeast is useful either for leavening or for creating alcohol. And whether we're talking about wine or whether we're talking about beer, we are talking about fermentation. Now, in the case of wine, where does the yeast come from? In this case, you can actually see it, because if you look at grapes close up, you'll notice this whitish film on the surface of the grape. That's yeast. So of course, when you smash up the grapes, the yeast gets to work. There's already plenty of water there, so it starts to ferment. This, of course, was all done without any understanding of the science that was going on, right? It was just by experience. They just knew that if you squash the grapes and let it sit, it would become alcohol. Same thing with barley. If you moisten the barley, let it sit, it would produce alcohol. It wasn't until relatively recently, of course, relatively recent, I'm talking as opposed to, 6,000 years ago, it was Antony van Leeuwenhoek, a Dutch scientist, who was the first to ever see yeast, or indeed any kind of microbe. And he drew pictures of it. And these were some of the pictures that he drew looking through his microscope. His microscope didn't look anything like what you would expect a microscope to look like. This was the original microscope with a tiny little lens. But the lens was perfectly ground in order to make it magnify substances. So he looked at all kinds of things. He looked at his own saliva. he looked at bread, he looked at beer and wine, and he reported seeing what he called little animalcules cavorting around. Now, these, of course, were bacteria and yeasts and viruses. He didn't know what to make of these, except to draw pictures of them. It was till the middle 1800s that this all remained a mystery, eventually unraveled, of course, by Louis Pasteur. Pasteur is the one who really understood what was going on. He worked endlessly. Obviously, his wife was not all that happy with all of his work, but he demonstrated that yeast multiplies, that yeast is actually made up of little cells, and if you watch through the microscope, you can actually see those multiply, and of course see the bubbles of gas, of carbon dioxide produced. And that is what is critical for leavening, right, for making dough rise. That's why you have the holes in the bread. That is all because of the bread being inflated by the gas that is trying to escape. So no matter which kind of bread you're looking at, this is all leavened bread, right? So it's all raised with carbon dioxide. And yeast, obviously, is commercially very important. And by the late 1800s, the science had pretty well been worked out so that yeast was available commercially. You could buy the yeast and make your own bread. And of course, commercial bakeries would buy that too. And this company is one of the oldest, L'Allemand, a Montreal company, is one of the oldest yeast companies. And the name is very interesting, because it was started by a guy from Germany, a German baker, who came to Quebec, and his co-workers called him L'Allemagne, the German. And that became L'Allemand, which is a huge yeast-producing company, and they've been in Montreal since the late 1800s. And it's a very interesting company. And I got an invitation to go see them, which I did do. They're out in the East End, and it doesn't look like very much from the outside. It's just one very, very large building. But what an amazing operation this is. I mean, I would have never imagined the size of this operation, with the trucks constantly coming and going. And of course, everything is based on the chemical reaction that takes place in the large fermentations vats, where you have yeast that is being cultured, that is, you give it food, which is sugar, so the yeast multiplies, and eventually they evaporate off the water and sell the yeast. But the size of these things is unbelievable. I couldn't even get the fermentation vessel into one picture because it's about 4 stories tall. And they have 6 of these. And they are constantly churning out the yeast. And the trucks are lined up taking this. I mean, it's amazing scale. The other really stunning thing is that it is almost all totally run by robots. I think there are about 6 people working in the whole place. Robots are everywhere. They do the packaging, they do the monitoring. I mean, it's just phenomenal technology. And the size of it, I mean, I never would have imagined that there's this much yeast that is being produced. And the amount of bread that is being consumed in North America, about 5 billion loaves a week. I mean, it's an unbelievable statistic, right? So they crank it all out and the bakeries buy it. Oh, it was very interesting. Now, of course, the reason to bring this all up is because in matzah there is no yeast. That is the whole difference, right? To commemorate the original story of matzah, which was not allowed to rise, we have the matzah, and it is nothing but flour and water. Now, interesting enough, there are some nutritional interests in matzah, and the Nutrition Action Health Letter, which is a pretty good publication, actually decided that matzah was the perfect food. Okay? Well, as you know, there's no such thing as a perfect food, right? There are good diets, there are poor diets, but it's always a mistake to label any food as miraculous or as devilish. It's the overall diet that matters. But anyway, what caught my attention here was they were talking about Horowitz Margaretin's whole wheat matzah. You know it? Yes? I'd never heard of this, but it exists. No, but this one, Horowitz? I think that's old, right? Yeah. I can't find it now. I don't think they sell it now. Anyway, this is the one that they said was, the perfect food. So we can't find this, but of course we can find others, like this one here. Is it a perfect food? Well, look at the label. Now, of course, there is no fat in it, no trans fat, no sodium, no cholesterol. All of that is good. But neither is there anything else in it except just starch. It's flour, right? So it's not any kind of a nutritional miracle, right? It's certainly good for representing Passover, which of course is what it is supposed to do. And it's not fattening, so anyone who's worried about caloric intake, because it has very low calorie content, but its vitamin content, mineral content is also non-existent. So it's certainly not a nutritional miracle. But anyway, it's interesting to look at the history of it. Now, there's some other interesting things to look at in connection with Passover, like this: kosher for Passover Coca-Cola. So what the hell is that about? I mean, why isn't Coca-Cola always kosher? Well, therein lies an interesting story. First of all, let's take a glimpse at history of Coke in the first place. And that can be traced back to John Pemberton, who actually was a physician. He had a medical degree, but he practiced as a pharmacist. But during the Civil War, he was injured, a saber cut right across his chest, very painful. And he became a morphine addict. Now, morphine during the Civil War was the prime painkiller. And of course, there was no great care in worrying about addiction or not. Anyway, he became addicted to morphine. And he wanted to get off of it. So he began to experiment because he had pharmaceutical knowledge. And he wanted to find something that could take away his pain and that wasn't addictive. And he came up with something. He called it wine coca. What it was wine in which he had dissolved some cocaine. Because cocaine, of course, is a painkiller, and so it really did work. But it had to be dissolved in alcohol. That was the wine component. But in the late 1800s, in Georgia, where he lived, there was a temperance movement. This was before the Prohibition in the 1920s. But Georgia prohibited the sale of alcohol in the late 1800s. So he had to come up with some sort of alternative. So he went into his lab and he started working on it. And here he is, this statue, which is in the Coca-Cola Museum in Atlanta. Atlanta, of course, is Coca-Cola's main plant, and all their offices are there. And they have a museum, which includes this bronze statue of Pemberton cooking up what became the original Coca-Cola syrup. It was a medicine. He originally wanted this as a pain reliever. But then he also had some marketing ideas. So all of a sudden, it became the intellectual beverage and temperance drink because alcohol wasn't available. Contains the valuable tonic and nerve stimulant properties of the coca plant and the cola nut. So indeed, originally it did contain extracts of the coca plant and the cola nut. And the extract of the coca plant, it's actually an extract from the leaves, that is cocaine. The cola nut serves a different purpose. The cola nut is very concentrated in caffeine. So this was mixture of caffeine and cocaine. That was the original Coca-Cola, and it was marketed not as a beverage, but as a tonic, as a medicine. And then he decided that he had to somehow make it more appealing to the public because it tasted somewhat bitter. So what he did was he added some carbonation. He added soda water. Soda water was kind of a novelty back then. So he dissolved his concoction in soda water, and then he realized that this could also serve as a fountain drink. And he started selling it from his pharmacy. And it became quite popular. I mean, it wasn't hugely popular, and it never allowed him to get rid of his addiction for morphine. And he actually got sicker and sicker and decided to sell the company that he had founded. And he sold it to Asa Candler, a Georgia businessman. Candler bought it for, believe it or not, $238. That's what he paid for the formula of Coca-Cola. It was a good investment, right? It was Candler who really made Coca-Cola into a big deal, and also the one who popularized the idea that there's this formula 7X that only 2 people in the world know, and that it is in a vault in their headquarters in Atlanta, and all this whole mythology. Well, there actually is a vault in their headquarters in Atlanta, and there it is. It's a very sophisticated vault, and this is where they tell you they keep the formula. Now, of course, some of the formula is known. I mean, obviously, you know that there's sugar in it, there's phosphoric acid in it, that they openly, tell you. But the flavors are a mixture of various herbal extracts and food extracts. So there is some mystery about that. I mean, not a whole lot of mystery, because obviously these days with the chemical analytical methods that we have, it is possible to detect virtually everything in Coca-Cola. But of course they keep up the mystery of the flavoring. But anyway, today our interest here is about this Coca-Cola for Passover. In the 1930s, question came up about whether Coca-Cola was kosher, because by this time there had been quite a large Jewish immigration into the United States, observant Jews who were interested in where to buy kosher foods. And Coca-Cola was already popular, and they wanted to know if this was kosher. So where do you go if you want to find out such things? I mean, rabbis are the ultimate authority on this. So they went to the chief rabbi of Atlanta, which was Rabbi Tobias Geffen, and they asked him to look into Coca-Cola. But he said, how can I? The formula is a secret. I can't tell. So they said, well, go and negotiate with Coca-Cola, because there's an increasing Jewish population, which at that time was true in the United States. He said, well, you're missing out on a whole market if you can't declare it to be kosher. So indeed, Rabbi Geffen went and met with Coca-Cola and they signed an agreement that he would have access to the secret formula with the promise that he would never reveal it to anyone. And the only reason that he was allowed to look at it was to determine if the ingredients were kosher or not. So he looked, and he was able to come to a conclusion. And as he said, with the help of God, I've been able to uncover a pragmatic solution according to which there would be no question or any doubt concerning the ingredients of Coca-Cola. I'm not sure to what extent God was involved. I doubt that he or she cares much about the ingredients in Coca-Cola. But anyway, there were some concerns that Geffen had. One was about glycerin, which is used as a sweetener in Coke, and it is derived from fats. When you have a fat and you break it down, it breaks down into glycerin and fatty acids. Right? Now, the trouble is that you can therefore make glycerin from any kind of fat. And Coca-Cola was making it from beef fat. Right? So this, of course, was not acceptable because you can't mix meat and milk so that you couldn't then have Coca-Cola with dairy. Right? But there was a simple solution to this because, as I said, you can get glycerol from any kind of fat. It doesn't have to be animal fat. And the Coca-Cola company decided, okay, well, this is easy enough for us to cater to. And they decided on cottonseed oil. So now the glycerin that is in Coca-Cola is made from cottonseed oil, and then therefore there's no meat issue involved. Then there were a couple of other concerns. One was about the alcohol that was used to extract the natural flavors. Now, some of these natural flavors we know. One, for example, is vanillin. I mean, the company admits this. So to get vanillin, you need the vanilla bean, and you have to extract it with alcohol. So Geffen had a question here. Where do you get the alcohol? Okay? What do you ferment to get the alcohol? So there are some grains, of course, you cannot use on Passover, right? So he had to make sure that whatever alcohol that they were using was alcohol that did not come from any of the prohibited grains. So he had to make sure that all the alcohol that they used for the extraction was by fermenting sugar, which is totally fine. So that was in the 1930s, and everything was fine. There was, all Coca-Cola was okay for, the whole year. There was no problem. The problem occurred in the 1960s when the company replaced sugar in the soft drink with high fructose corn syrup. Now, high fructose corn syrup is a mixture of glucose and fructose. This is pure sucrose. In terms of sweetness, it doesn't matter, right? The reason the company decided to do this, well, why do companies decide to do anything? It's cheaper, right? Corn syrup was much cheaper. There were a lot of corn subsidies that were available to farmers. So there was a lot of corn being raised. And when you ferment cornstarch, of course, you get all kinds of products, including a mixture of glucose and fructose that you can then use as a sweetener. There was no problem with corn, right? I mean, corn is okay on Passover. That wasn't the issue. The issue is that there were some other grains that, at least in Ashkenazi philosophy, are not okay on Passover. And the concern was that when you make flour, people may not be able to tell the difference, so that any flour made from corn might look like any flour made from any of the prohibited grains. And therefore, the decision was that you can't use any grain, including corn, even though there's nothing wrong with corn. You can eat corn on Passover. But the concern was that people may have made a mistake and, thinking that it was corn flour, but taking one of the others. So what was the solution here? The solution, of course, was to not use corn syrup as a sweetener. So that is what we have in Passover Coca-Cola. It is made with sugar, not made with corn syrup. That's what makes it kosher for Passover. Okay? I mean, this is a philosophical kind of thing. There's no practical significance. I mean, there's no calorie difference, no nutritional difference. It's just that there's no corn that is involved in the production. There are some Coca-Cola plants, there are Coca-Cola plants all over the world. There are some that actually always use sugar. Mexican Coca-Cola. If any of you have ever been to Mexico and drank Coca-Cola there, it's always sweetened with sugar, with sucrose, because it's cheap enough there. And in other countries, it may be corn syrup, it may be sugar anyway. So this is a story of the Passover Coke, and when you look at the label, you can see water, sucrose, no high fructose corn syrup, caramel. Caramel, of course, is the coloring of Coca-Cola. And how do you get caramel? Just by burning sugar, right? Color, phosphoric acid, natural flavors. Well, this term natural flavors, this is that 7X formula, which is in the vault. Just what is involved in these natural flavors. I mean, we know that vanilla is one, bergamot, which is a spice, is another one. There are some other spices. So they make a big deal, of course, of the whole business of secret formula, but it's pretty well known. Anyway, of course, there's going to be a lot of meat eating on Passover, right? Brisket is for many people, is the choice of meat, and can be made very delicious. Or schnitzel, which is made with matzo meal, sort of a strange thing for any schnitzel lover, but nevertheless, it's of course it doesn't use any flour. So really, there's a lot of meat that is eaten, right, in that holiday, which leads me to take a look at a diet that recently has stupidly become very popular, which is the carnivore diet. This diet allows you to eat virtually only animal products. So meat, eggs, fish, dairy are okay, but no grains, no vegetables. This is the carnivore diet. Who eats a carnivore diet naturally? Lions eat a carnivore diet naturally. But the humans who abide by the carnivore diet will eat a variety of meats and almost nothing else. They will snack on butter. They will eat sticks of butter for a snack. And there is no vegetables, no grains allowed on this diet. This flies in the face of everything we know about science. These days, to suggest such a diet is absolutely outlandish, because we know of the benefits of a plant-based diet. Now, I don't say that it has to be exclusively plant-based. I think you can have a very, very healthy diet without being a vegan, without being a vegetarian. It's proportions that matter. So when we say plant-based, it means that you can still eat some meat, but most of the food should be plant-based. And this is from good evidence. We have all kinds of studies showing that. Look at the conclusion of this meta-analysis. A meta-analysis is a study of studies. This is when you take all of the studies that you can find, in this case about plant-based diet, pool them all together and see what the result is. And this is very, very important in science, to be able to look at different studies. We never make any big decision based on one study, because you can find a study to show almost anything. Okay? So that's why we put them all together to see what cranks out and see the conclusion. Better adherence to plant-based dietary patterns, especially those emphasizing healthy plant-based foods, is beneficial for lowering the risk of major chronic conditions, including type 2 diabetes, vascular disease, cancer, and premature death. I mean, what more do you want, right? You want to avoid premature death, right? You want to put off death to the very last moment, right? So a plant-based diet works. The carnivore people tell you that their diet leads to weight loss, resolves arthritis, reduces the inflammation, all of these things. None of this has any significant scientific evidence. It is all anecdotal stuff. These days, the guru of this carnivore diet is Shawn Baker, a former, believe it or not, orthopedic surgeon who has left the profession, became a bodybuilder, and tells you to eat meat and why you shouldn't eat vegetables. He's the guru of this movement. However, he's not the one who really made it popular. Believe it or not, the one who really popularized it was Jordan Peterson. Now, I would imagine most of you have heard of Jordan Peterson. He's that former psychology professor at University of Toronto who has some interesting ideas, some of which are reasonable, most of them are not. But one thing is for sure, he has no background in nutrition, and yet he has become a fervent believer in the carnivore diet. And it was when he was on with Joe Rogan, the most popular podcast in the world, unbelievably so, that he spewed out all of his thoughts about the carnivore diet. Where did he learn it from? From his daughter, Michaela Peterson, who curiously, for some reason that no one knows, was named after Mikhail Gorbachev. And anyway, she had indeed suffered from arthritis and went on the carnivore diet and claimed all kinds of benefits. She looks like she had some benefits, but I don't think it came from the carnivore diet. But anyway, her father then became a carnivore disciple and even wrote a book about how it's good for depression, anxiety, and other diseases. And because he was on the Joe Rogan podcast, which for some unbelievable reason is unbelievably popular, millions of people watch it every day around the world. It's really this curious phenomenon. Now he does sometimes have reasonable guests, so it's not all total nonsense. But anyway, he listened to Peterson, and he himself started the carnivore diet, and of course documented it on his social media. And because of the large voice that he has, the diet became very, very popular. Now, Baker did not invent the carnivore diet or the meat-based diet. This actually had a long history. Back in the 18th century, John Rollo suggested a meat diet for diabetes. Now, at that time, it kind of seemed reasonable because they knew that sugar was connected to diabetes. They knew by testing urine, if you tasted urine and tasted sweet, you knew that that was diabetes. So it made sense to recommend a meat diet because meat doesn't contain any sugar, right? So way back then, the meat diet was already popular. Then In the late 1800s, an American physician, Dr. James Salisbury, was also a fervent believer in the carnivore diet, and his magical meal was the Salisbury steak, which still is around today. It's a steak with some gravy of unknown etiology poured over it. Anyway, it was basically representative of a all carnivore diet. But what is wrong with this diet? Besides the fact I just showed you that the studies show that a plant-based diet is better, the carnivore diet is extremely low in fiber because it doesn't allow any fruits and vegetables. This is critical. Fiber is an essential nutrient. Fiber is that part of our food supply that we cannot break down. It doesn't get absorbed into the bloodstream, so it goes straight through, which is important. As Dr. John Harvey Kellogg used to say, fiber is like the little broom that sweeps out your intestine. And there's something to that. We also know that there's a strong link between fiber consumption and colorectal cancer. The more fiber you eat per day, the lower the risk of colorectal cancer. So that carnivore diet is certainly not a good thing when you're concerned about colorectal cancer. And then there's another problem with this diet. When you don't have enough fiber in your diet, you get what is referred to as explosive diarrhea. Well, better we say less about that. Certainly it is not something that you want to have to deal with. But if you go on a carnivore diet, it will happen, although the body does adjust, and after a few weeks, it kind of tones down. But it's not something you want to deal with. And then also remember that the International Agency for Research on Cancer has placed red meat in its category of probably causing cancer. And processed meats, like your hot dogs and smoked meat and other cold cuts, are in group 1, known carcinogens. So there's no question that an all meat diet goes against the grain here, right? Because this is the evidence that scientific societies tell us. We also know that the more meat you have in your diet, the higher the level of your LDL, and that's the bad cholesterol, right? Goes up with meat eating. And then there's also trimethylamine oxide. I don't want to get into any details here, but this is something that is found in meat. You don't want it because it is implicated in all kinds of problems. And if you want more, endometrial problems are also linked to a high meat consumption. And it's not only what meat contains that may be a problem, maybe a bigger problem is what it doesn't contain, because the vitamins like vitamin C and minerals, magnesium, potassium, are in plant products, and you don't find them in meat. What you do find is a huge amount of protein, which can cause kidney stones. And that is a significant issue with the carnivore diet. And there's evidence. There was a big story about this when a woman who's a big influencer on social media, even though I must say that I never heard of her, but once I started to look her up, she turned out to be pretty big. This woman, Eve Catherine, had to go to emergency with kidney stones because she had started the carnivore diet. So the carnivore diet is not one to be recommended, for sure. And it's hard to understand how it has, taken off the way it is. Now, I think it's probably true that you can lose weight on it, because how much meat can you eat? You get tired of eating meat. And again, the studies show that they actually consume fewer calories, but you're sacrificing your health. Anyway, something that does fit into the carnivore diet are insects, which are in fact very high in protein. So things like roasted grasshoppers, very low in fat, very high in protein. And you can see from the nutrition here, total fat content is about 5%. That's very low. It has good fiber content and it's good protein content. The only little problem is the taste. But believe it or not, although we don't tend to do this here in North America, around the world, there's a lot of insect consumption. If you go to Asia, this is what you'll find. You don't find this, of course, here, but you certainly find it in Asian markets. And things like grasshoppers, roasted grasshoppers, are part of the diet, as are beetles. This is a beetle stew, right? And of course, we don't eat that here. But we do eat insects in one way here, and stems from this. These little guys, they're very, very small. They're a fraction of a centimeter. And they live on cacti, mostly in Peru, other South American places as well. And the female of the species produces a red dye. Now, they're very small. These are all insects on the cactus. When you squeeze the female one, you get the red dye. This is cochineal. It's a dye that is used in food as an additive. Now, you'll find it, of course, in mostly questionable foods like this, but there it is. Carmine is the technical name for it. And you'll find it in all kinds of other foods as well. And I'm sure you've all consumed this. There is the kosher question that comes up here, because insects are not kosher. However, you can also make carmine in the lab. It can be reproduced. So you never know where the source of the carmine is. So if you are truly observant, cochineal extract is not kosher. All right, so enough talk about this silly stuff. Let's get to something that is interesting and important, because, as you know, there's a lot of talk these days about processed foods and about their negative effects on health. But in order to really determine what the effect is, you have to design a study. And human studies are not easy to carry out. Nutritional studies especially, because most nutritional studies rely on surveying large numbers of people about what they had eaten and then seeing their health status. There are many problems with those kind of studies, because we are notoriously poor at remembering what we ate. I can tell you that if I asked you now to write down exactly what you ate yesterday, including amounts, you'd have a very difficult time doing that. And I did this experiment myself, actually. For 3 days, I kept a diary, and I wrote down absolutely everything that I ate, including amounts, as best as I could, measure it. So that's well documented, written down. Okay? Then the next day, without looking obviously at my notes, I wanted to see if I could reproduce from memory what I had eaten. Now remember that this was just 3 days. And on the 4th day, I tried this. And so I wrote down everything then, and I compared it. And there were differences. I tried to eat an apple every day, so I had automatically written down 3 apples for the 3 days. Right? But then when I look back on my notes, I saw that one day I had actually gone out for lunch, and I didn't eat an apple that day. I just didn't remember that. There were some other differences as well. And this was only trying to remember something for the last 3 days. These surveys usually ask you for the last 6 months or the last year. How many apples did you consume in the last 6 months, right? Okay, so that's why it's very difficult to rely on those kind of surveys. But otherwise, how do you do it? The only other way, if you want to have real data, is to have people who are willing to stay in some place, some clinical setting, and eat only what you tell them to eat, only what you allow them to eat, and then see what happens. Well, you know how difficult that is to do. Not impossible, but difficult, but you can do it if you have the funds and you have some volunteers. And that's how this study by Kevin Hall was carried out, which was really interesting. So they enlisted 20 adults who were willing to stay in a clinical setting that is, totally isolated from the world, and eat only what they were given and not bring in anything else, nothing. And the goal here just was to see what happens. The difference that they wanted to look at was between a diet that was made up of ultra-processed foods and unprocessed foods, because this is what is of great interest today. You see all of in the media, magazines, you see articles about the devilish ultra-processed foods, etc. So what they did was they had these 20 people for 2 weeks eat either the unprocessed or the processed diet. After 2 weeks, they would switch. And the ones who had been eating the unprocessed and ate the processed, etc. So you had 4 weeks of pretty reliable data, right? I mean, 4 weeks is not monumental, but at least it is something. So let me just show you what the meals were. So for example, you had to make sure that the meals were equally matched in terms of calories, nutritional content, which they did do. So for breakfast, in the unprocessed, Greek yogurt with fruit, walnuts, olive oil, apple slices, fresh squeezed lemon. We would all look at that and say that's pretty healthy. But the ultra-processed, you had your Honey Nut Cheerios and a blueberry muffin with lots of fat, etc. But calorically matched. So the calorie content of this is about the same as the calorie content of that. For lunch, you can see here spinach salad with chicken breast as opposed to beef ravioli. But once again, pretty well matched in calories. And for dinner, beef tenderloin and the side salad in the unprocessed menu, the ultra-processed menu, gravy and mashed potatoes with butter and margarine and diet lemonade, and so obviously a lot of processing there. So the interesting thing here, the main finding, given that they were allowed to eat as much as they wanted, there was no stipulation about that. The only stipulation was what they were allowed to eat, but not how much. So during, let's say, when they were on the ultra-processed menu, all the food was put out for them, the ultra-processed, but they could eat as much as they want. Similarly for the other. The major finding, remember that the diets were matched, so that if you ate the same amount of each one, you'd have the same calorie content. But they didn't eat the same amount. It turned out that on the ultra-processed diet, they ended up eating 500 calories a day more. That's a lot of extra calories. That will put on the weight, right? Why? Because that ultra-processed food tastes good. It has lots of sugar, lots of fat, lots of salt. It tastes good. And here is the evidence. The evidence is that you will eat more of the bad stuff when you're allowed to, eat as much as you want. Yes. They were matched in everything. They were matched in calcium content, magnesium content, calorie content. Yeah. Yeah, fiber content. Yeah, about the same. Everything was about the same. But they just ate more of the ultra-processed stuff. It just tasted better. Yeah. Anyway, so there will be a lot of eating being done pretty soon, right? Whether you're celebrating Easter or Passover or whatever. And there's another question that comes up after this, whether or not there's such a thing as a food coma, right? Because you know that when you eat a lot, there are symptoms, right, that you notice. But is this scientifically sound, right? The story very often is told about turkey, that turkey contains the amino acid tryptophan, which in the body converts to serotonin, and that converts to melatonin, and that is what increases your sedation, right? Melatonin is a sedating substance. I mean, this is why we take it for sleep. So that's the argument. It's a bad argument because chicken contains as much serotonin as turkey, and salmon has more. And you don't hear about people saying that they're going to fall asleep after they eat salmon. The other argument is that digestion uses a lot of energy, which is true, but that doesn't make you fall asleep. So is there any scientific evidence that eating more makes you sluggish, after a meal? Well, believe it or not, there were experiments done with, of all things, slugs. Now, how do you measure sluggishness in a slug? You give them food to eat, and then you monitor their mobility. This is done with a video camera, right? So you see the slugs, and you see them move about. This is not the most exciting research, I would think, right? And you monitor how they move about, and you discover that indeed, after they've had a heavy meal of seaweed, which is their preferred food, they move about more sluggishly. So there's something for this. And then this was sort of replicated more or less with fruit flies. How on earth do you test whether or not fruit flies are sleepy after a meal? There are scientists that do this. Each fly is in a tube, and it's all videoed, and they're fed from on top, and then they monitor how much the flies move up and down. And it turns out that after a meal, the flies become sleepy, right? And there are researchers who actually, do this. So, fact is that food coma is real. But what good does it tell us to know that slugs become more sluggish if they eat, or that fruit flies fly more or less depending on what they eat? What we're interested in is people. And there was a study done, this was done in India, for 4,600 adolescents, and they looked at how they performed on tests relative to what they had eaten. And it turns out that there was a difference. Is that if they had a heavy meal, they did not perform as well. So that's what I now tell my students. I tell them that when they're studying for an exam, it's not a good idea to have a heavy meal just before. You want to have just very small snacks. So yeah, food coma is real. Also demonstrated, of course, by the lion, who sleeps about 20 hours a day. That's what lions do. They have pretty heavy meals, and they sleep about 20 hours a day. which is pretty good because it means that they have less time to listen to the food babe or to Gwyneth Paltrow or that imbecile Robert Kennedy. So that's good motive for eating, so you can go to sleep and not listen to these idiots. All right, that's it for today. Yeah. Okay, good question. Between pickling and fermenting. Fermenting is a natural process where you rely on bacteria like lactobacillus that are already present on the pickle. So they will ferment, they will produce, you'll see gas bubbling, etc., and they will produce lactic acid, which is the preservative, okay? And that also is what gives a tang to the pickles. But you can also preserve pickles without fermentation just by pouring vinegar on them. That's the difference. It's not going to taste the same because there's no internal production of lactic acid as you have in the fermented pickles. But it will have a vinegary taste. So it's just a question of which one you like. But no matter how you make your pickles, they will be full of salt. You cannot make pickles that are not salty. Yeah. Yeah. It triggers the release of dopamine. Dopamine is what we call the pleasure chemical. And this is what makes you happy no matter what you do. As long as what you're doing is what makes you happy. It's because it causes release of dopamine. But with alcohol, like with everything else, you're constantly weighing the risks and the benefits. Okay? The risks are real. I mean, these days, nobody contests that. We know of all the detrimental effects of alcohol, even aside from the drunken drivers, which is, of course, criminal. But you also get some pleasure from alcohol. So the risk, of course, depends on dose. And this is where the debate is, is there a threshold effect? Well, the studies actually show that there's no threshold effect, that even small amounts are problematic, but the problems are small, So we do many, many things in life that are potentially risky, but we just decide that the benefits outweigh the risks. Yes. Yeah. So what I normally say is, if you enjoy that glass of red wine, with your dinner, do it. But, realize that this is just one of many, many small risks that we take in life. Don't start drinking red wine because you think that it has benefits on heart. It doesn't. That's known. Drink it because you like it. That's it, And I more and more, I say that it's just wrong to want to evaluate every drop of whatever you drink and every morsel of food in terms of, is it good for me or is it not? First of all, it's a useless question because it's not determinable, but it can make you crazy if you worry about absolutely everything. That's why it's the overall diet that matters, not, yeah. Yeah. Well, okay, the question is, how do we know about vitamins? How do we know how much we should take, etc.? And this has evolved over about a century of research, by thousands of scientists. It is overseen here by Health Canada and the US by FDA. They're the ones who make the decision about, what is a reasonable amount of vitamin to have in a vitamin supplement. But it's based on decades and decades of work. It's not one person who determines that. Oh, the question, what is the difference between the letters? They serve totally different functions. So for example, the reason that you need vitamin C is to prevent a disease called scurvy, okay? B vitamin prevents a disease called pellagra. Vitamin D is important for other reasons. The vitamin D is important for bone function. So each one of those vitamins has a different purpose. The definition of a vitamin is a substance that the human body cannot make, and therefore you have to have it in your diet because it is needed for health. That's what a vitamin is. Okay? But the different vitamins have different indications of what they will prevent. Now, if you have a proper balanced diet, you are getting all your vitamins in there. But a lot of people, are confused about what a balanced diet is. So they take the vitamin supplement as sort of nutritional insurance, which is, not an unreasonable argument. Okay, proteins, there are thousands of different kinds of proteins. A protein is just a molecule that is a chain of amino acids. And there are 20 amino acids that exist. So you can put them together in endless combinations. Okay, it's like if you had colored beads and you want to make a necklace, right? I mean, you can make an infinite number of necklaces depending on the sequence of those. So there are many, many different kinds of proteins. So the protein in meat is not exactly the same as the protein that you would get in a vegetable. But it doesn't really matter because when you digest this, they get broken down into their component amino acids. It doesn't matter where they came from. The body will then use those amino acids to build its own proteins. Yeah, very simple. It will raise your blood pressure. Pardon? Well, because the kidneys regulate the amount of sodium that you have in your bloodstream. Sodium is actually an essential nutrient. Every cell needs it. But if you take in too much sodium, then in order to keep the concentration the same in your body, the body will retain more water, right? In order to maintain the same concentration. If it starts retaining water, it means that your blood contains more liquid, your blood pressure goes up. Not really. I mean, potassium chloride instead of sodium chloride is better, except that it doesn't really taste like salt. So what good is a salt substitute if it doesn't really taste like salt? Yes, but nobody in North America is deficient in salt because it's put into everything. Yeah. I thought I went over that in pretty great detail. Talking about food coma. Okay, some of the ingredients we know. Okay, sugar, phosphoric acid, that we know. Then there's the mystery ingredients in their Formula 7X, which is a mixture of vanilla extract and various fruit extracts and then herbal extracts, which really they try to keep secret. But it's the acidity that you taste is from phosphoric acid and the sweetness is from sugar. The less you drink of it, the better. That's the bottom line. All right, we'll see you next month.